Hi everyone, it's Nick. Welcome back to my channel. Okay, in today's video, we are going to be talking about how to spot a bad interior design trend. In the 5 years that I have been on YouTube, we've seen some real doozies, haven't we? We've seen them here covered on the channel because I have been known to weigh in on bad interior design trends in my time, made a career out of it, and we've seen some, right? We've seen the pampas grass come and go. Remember the 5 minutes when that was really popular? We were literally going into ditches and grabbing pampas grass and cutting them with scissors and then bringing them back into our house. Do you know what I mean? We've seen some real doozies. And so we're gonna talk about that today. We're gonna give you some examples of where I think trends have gone wrong. And I'm gonna show you how I spot bad interior design trends that then I share here with you all on the internet. So I have some criteria that I go through when I take a look at whether or not I think a trend is gonna last. And I'm gonna break all that out for you and provide examples. So let's get going. Okay, but before I hop in today's video, I wanna thank today's sponsor, which is Bombas. Bombas is a comfort-focused premium basics brand. And they also believe in a model where for every item that you purchase, they turn around and give an essential item to someone in need. Bombas makes a bunch of really amazing different clothing items, lots and lots of super cool basics, but they are most well known for their amazing, best-in-class, fabulous, awesome socks, whether that's gonna be athletic socks or no-show socks or dressy socks. Everything you're looking at, they've got you covered. So I actually got 2 pairs of sort of the dressy over the calf socks, which are really, really awesome and probably my favorite of the bunch. And I also got some really cool no-show socks, which are nice to do if you're enjoying the sockless sort of look for your athletic wear, which is really, really cute. And I'm also really eager to try on the everyday compression sock. These are really great for when you're needing that little bit of support and compression. Specifically, I got them because I'm looking at doing a lot of traveling. I have been doing a lot of traveling this year. So you can feel good and do good when you buy products from Bombas. And so if you're eager to give them a go, feel free to click on the link in my description and to also use code nicklewis to get 20% off your first purchase. And thank you, Bombas, for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to how to spot a bad trend. Okay, first up on my list, right, when the criteria that we're looking for when spotting a good or a bad design trend is how difficult is it to clean? How impractical is it from a cleaning perspective? And I know that maybe isn't the sexiest topic to talk about, but oftentimes when I'm looking at interior design trends, which you'll see throughout this video for a lot of these different topics, is things that are really super popular and great on social media and look great in magazines and celebs have them. And then when they actually get into the practicality and we actually get them into people's homes, people start to realize they don't make sense and therefore they start to flounder. So what are some examples of that? Open shelving, I think we're starting to see a little bit more on the way out than we have in previous years, which I don't know why. I've only mentioned it maybe 2 or 3 times on the channel, maybe in my lifetime. What else has come and gone? Vessel sinks, right? A lot of you hate vessel sinks, myself kind of included. I think they look kind of pretty. Like I think there's some pretty little bowls out there, some pretty little vessels, but they are really notoriously difficult to clean. I think some of these like alcove tubs that are then converted into freestanding bathtubs, I mentioned this into a recent like cleaning video, I'll link at the end of this one, those are another example. They're difficult to clean. It's hard to get back there. And so what happens when word gets out? They look really cool on social media, they become really difficult to clean, word gets out, people start to go, okay, these are actually stupid, and a trend dies. So when I'm looking at what are the dumb ones that are not here to last, I look for the ones that are really extremely difficult to clean. Now, sometimes, you know, the juice is worth the squeeze. And sometimes, yes, they might be a little bit more difficult to clean and they might be annoying, but they might be worth it because they're so good in 1,000 other ways that maybe they're worth it. I don't think none of these things necessarily completely eliminate. It's just some of the criteria, the lenses in which you have to sort of look at trends to be a little bit more savvy on whether or not they're gonna last. And so cleaning is one of them. It's not the only one, but it is one that you definitely should take a look at if you're trying to determine if something truly is timeless, is does this look difficult to clean? And if the answer is yes, it might be a trend that's not gonna be with us for much longer. Okay, next on my list is gonna be things like that are just universally unflattering on human beings. So this is something where we're really talking about the aesthetics on how something sort of lands on you as a person, right? Like and also I'm gonna lump sort of ergonomics a little bit in here because I do think that also really matters. So let's talk about things that are unflattering or that are not ergonomic. They're not really built for humans. And sometimes we see a lot of bad design that is just not really good fit for humans. It doesn't make sense. It's not flattering. It doesn't look good on us. It's hard to get in and out of. It's just difficult for us to use. And remember that, you know, interiors really is about making your space more accessible and beautiful, but it's meant to be lived in. It's meant for someone to live there. And so again, sometimes these things look great in theory, but when we start to break them out into sort of the practical real world situations, they just don't make sense anymore. So a really good example would be like open light bulbs, right? We've seen so many of these like glass shades, right? They're just, or plain bulbs even. Like remember the Edison bulbs of the 2010s when everything was super industrial and everybody wanted to look like they were, I don't know, in some sort of third wave coffee shop circa 2011. Do you know what I'm talking? That sort of look, right? Or you want to look like you're in a Montana's, I don't know, like a steakhouse. That sort of vibe, they're not particularly flattering. Those lights aren't flattering to people. There's no shade, there's no diffuse lighting. Oftentimes the lighting is quite cool. And therefore, when you have a bare bulb or just a plain glass shade, not only are they kind of difficult to clean, but they're also just universally unflattering on people. A bare bulb, as I say here on the channel all the time, is the diffuse lighting is beautiful lighting. So, you know, if you don't have any shade on there and it's never diffused, it's coming from a direct light source right in someone's face, you're always gonna look like garbage, right? It's just like, you know when you have a photo of yourself and you're squinting and it's a hot summer day and there's not a cloud in the sky and you're like, why do I look so awful? It's because there's not diffused behind clouds, right? So that's why you look awful. So when you bring that into your own home, it's a sign of a trend that's just not gonna make sense. So as I said, cool light is included in this conversation as well, but I'm gonna also throw ergonomics sort of in this category because I look at things that might make sense for a 21-year-old to get in and out of the Togo sofa, but might not make a lot of sense for people that are over the age of 30. I don't know, not to say like 31-year-olds can't move and be, you know, move around really well, because hopefully, you know, we should all be doing our exercise so that we have longevity into our senior years. That's ideal. But the Togo sofa, I don't know if you sat in one, but they're not the comfiest to get in and out of. Don't get me wrong, when you're in one, it's great. It's great, but like, it's comfortable, but it's essentially feels like a beanbag chair. And there's a reason why those only exist in 13-year-old bedrooms, because they just don't make sense for most people. They're not fun to get in and out of. And so that's another thing too, is if it's not easy for people to use, humans, you know, real live humans, to actually go and live there and use these items, they're not gonna make sense long-term. And that's usually an example where word gets out and these things die a swift death. So that's another criteria that I personally look for when I'm assessing whether or not I think a trend is going to last or not. Okay, next up, trends that will not last, right? Another piece of criteria I think that's worth taking a look at is hygiene. Not necessarily just difficult to clean, but just like unhygienic in general. So I mentioned that pampas grass at the beginning of the video. Do you remember that? That was about a 7-minute long trend, but it was 2021. We didn't know where we were. We didn't know where we were at. We thought the world was ending. We were still confused. And in our confusion, we all reached for what is, I think, basically a weed and decided to put it in our own homes. These things are, they look like a sneeze just brought into your home, right? They're just clustered in a little thing and they sort of, they're brown, they're neutral, like they're warm, they're kinda got life, kinda. So like, sort of like the plant people were like, kind of, I guess, you know what I mean? Like it made sense for a trend for a few different reasons. But the biggest one here is just like I said, if you have any sort of an allergy, this is an absolute nightmare. I just want to sneeze looking at a photo of these things. And it didn't make sense for that reason, right? And there's other things too that just don't make sense. So, you know, small tiles can be really problematic depending on the surface. If it's a high traffic area, the grout lines can make it really difficult. Grout lines also in the kitchen, right? Tiled countertops, I sort of fit into this category. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, I think, for most people, because if you really like to use your kitchen, maybe if you've got a cute little kitchen island that you never use and you've got maybe butcher block or something else, or quartz or natural stone or something on the rest of the kitchen countertops, maybe it makes sense to have a little bit of tile. But if it's a main working surface in your kitchen, it's kind of unhygienic, right? It doesn't always make a whole ton of sense to use small little grout in those countertops. You know, chicken and stuff gets in grout, or raw chicken and all that sort of stuff, and it's just maybe not the best use. And it's a bit unhygienic. This isn't just a matter of cleaning, this is just plain old basic hygiene. And that is sometimes a problem when it comes to some of these trends that we see that are popular. People figure that out. I hope people don't get sick in order for us to figure it out. I hope people just figure it out on their own. Okay, next on my list is something that really leans into novelty or is very cheesy and very fake, right? So sometimes the jokes get old, and things like the first person who had a live, laugh, love sign in their room, let's be honest, they were pretty clever. Like they really did. She was a 55-year-old woman and she thought she was absolutely genius and she was clever, and all of her friends were like, that is adorbs. And it was. but it really leans on being a bit kitschy. I think we're all beyond that now. Now it's like a meme, like the live, laugh, love. There's so many of these, right, that are also part of the same conversation, and they just really sort of lean into novelty. They come across as kitschy and cheesy, and for those reasons, they never really last. For example, in the modern age, because if you're 25 and you're like, that's so like mom coded, but I don't do any of that. Really? Have you been to Urban Outfitters lately? Because they seem to think that you 25-year-olds are buying a lot of this stuff that is incredibly novelty driven, right? A lot of this postmodern stuff, it just feels really kitschy. I'm not sure your end table or your side table in your living room made of a giant ceramic tomato is gonna have as much longevity even as a live, laugh, love sign. So maybe you'd be lucky if those things still look cool in 5 to 10 years. Some of these things start to get a bit cheesy, right? I think if they get really cheesy, really themey, really novelty-y, if that's a word that I'm going to now use, I think those things tend to fall apart because the joke gets old. And so that's why some pieces like a wood coffee table does not get old. It's not a joke. It's a real piece of furniture that makes total sense. One that's shaped like a giant hamburger or made out of pool noodles does get old pretty quickly. These DIYs also fit into this category. It's just a joke that if your furniture or these pieces that are designed to last in your home, if you want to build a lasting style that's going to be relevant for years at a time and you're going to be happy to live in for years at a time, if it rests on a joke, you may find it's not going to be a trend that lasts very long. Do you remember when Barbiecore was popular because the movie came out? Yeah, see, if your interior design can't last longer than a media movie promotional campaign, that's not a good sign that your style has legs. Okay, next up, I look for is going to be just plain old cheap or poor quality materials. I almost don't even need to give examples for this one, right? But like when you have sort of cheap materials that don't really make a whole lot of sense, then that's an example of a trend that's not going to work. So for example, kind of similar to the cheesy, but I'm just gonna, I think it fits better in this category, is those faux mirrors that I made fun of years ago, right? Those DIY faux mirrors that people had for 6 months before, unfortunately, which is the worst part about all these bad trends, by the way, is they all end up in the landfill, and that is very upsetting, but that's just the reality of it, which just sucks, which is why I'm making videos like this, so you can choose things that don't just fall out of style 6 months or a year later. Anyway, the faux mirrors, right? It's made of what is a construction material. Like guys, this is a construction material. It's not a material that makes sense to use for like interior design, home decor mirrors things, right? The cloud mirrors, all this stuff where people are like putting clouds and fake lightning or something and lights and stuff in their ceiling, whatever. All this stuff is cheap, poor quality materials that is not going to last. A lot of the stuff that HomeSense, is turning out is like just, it's poor quality materials. And even though it might be trendy and cool and popular on social media for 5 minutes, because buy now in my Amazon storefront, but or here's my sponsored post from Temu, but the truth is that if it's really poor quality, crappy materials, they wear out, they don't wear in, which means if the whole trend is based around these materials, it's done. It's gonna last as long as the item will, which is probably a few months, sadly. Okay, next on my list, how to spot a bad interior design trend is going to be when the trend really lacks the context. So I'm really wanting to touch on architecture, which I don't talk about a lot on this channel because I know nothing about it, but that hasn't stopped me before, as you all know. I think that sometimes when there is no nod to the architecture of the space or the context of sort of where the space is located, that's a problem and probably something that's not going to last. So for example, all those archways that everybody thought that were so beautiful, or the painted archways that were everywhere, they oftentimes really lack context. They don't really make sense for the space. So for example, if you've got really low ceilings in a basement and you put an arch in, it's just probably not going to make a whole ton of sense, right? If you've got a big, beautiful home and you want to enter, and you got this gorgeous archway or something, or you have this area to sort of divide your dining room from your kitchen or something, and you want to turn it into an arch or something, and it makes sense for the area, you got taller ceilings, what have you, it might make sense. Arches are beautiful. Arches are timeless. They've been going on for a long time. The Romans, the Greeks, they've all been using arches. That's wonderful. But if it's not rooted in any of the sort of taking notes to the architecture of the space, it just lacks all context. And so when people start to take some of these trends and they shoehorn them in to spaces that they don't belong in, it just doesn't work. So things like putting, your cottagecore style in a brand new build condo that's extremely modern, it might not make a whole lot of sense, right? So a lot of these styles and these looks, and this is especially comes from the celebrity world, is there are items or trends or styles or things that make sense for a budget like they have, a home that they have that could be like 5,000-6,000 square feet plus, like 10,000 square foot home or something like that. They might make more sense sense in those types of homes. But here's the thing, when in order for those trends to really sort of gain traction in the mainstream, it requires people to sort of take those trends and port them into a 700 square foot condo, and it just doesn't make as much sense. It's just not going to work, right? If you love modern farmhouse or cottagecore and you're putting it into a new build condo or something, or a new home that's very modern in its architecture, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So sometimes people want to take the hot new item and then they put it into a space that it just doesn't make sense. And then surprise, the trend dies because it's stupid. And so sometimes I take a look at, does this make sense? This, whatever this style or this trend is, does it actually make sense for most people's homes? And if the answer is no, then I don't think it's going to last very long. Okay, next up, building off of that, but I just want to be a little bit more specific about something else to look at when spotting a bad trend, which is a lack of space. Really taking into account that some trends are really cool and really popular, but they really kind of make more sense for bigger homes or homes that a lot of people don't actually live in. So for example, you look and you flipping through Architectural Digest and you're like, oh my God, this is so amazing. Oh wow, that is amazing that they decided to put a tree in their living room. How freaking cool is that? Yeah, they're also Chrissy Teigen, okay, and John Legend, okay, and it was designed by Jake Arnold. So are you John Legend or Chrissy Teigen? If you are, hello, nice to meet you. But guess what? You probably, if you're not them, you probably don't have space for a tree in your living room, right? So a tree in a bathroom, similar, a tree anywhere in your house, to be honest with you, like maybe a courtyard, but like, even then, probably don't. Like it's tricky to make some of these designs work in a usual kind of typical space. They just require a whole lot of room. Like people might say, new hot trend, fireplace in a bathroom. Cool. Most people are lucky to fit a vanity and maybe with 2 sinks in a primary. What a dream that would be. You know what I mean? Most people are lucky to be able to open the door into the bathroom and not hit somebody or something else in the room when they get in there, right? So they're trying to find space-saving solutions to fit their little racks and their little robe hooks and all the rest of it. They don't have room for a tree. So a lot of these freestanding tubs and a lot of these things, they just don't make sense for most people, right? And that's the thing is it could be really this hot, cool trend that starts out in the celeb circuit and amongst these really cool, awesome, amazing, beautiful designers, and then it just never gets the chance to filter into most people's homes, and so it just dies a swift death in that way. Okay, next up on my list is going to be terrible upkeep. You know, we talked about cleaning, and that's part of the story. But some of these items aren't necessarily difficult to clean. They just require a lot of upkeep and therefore don't make practical sense for most people. So a good example of this one is the cloud sofa, right? Like I made fun of the cloud sofa back in like 2021. Hi, RH. I was gonna say, are you watching? Probably not, because you don't like me because I've made fun of you several times. Hi, RH. You know, the old cloud sofa, super popular in 2021. Everybody wanted the dupes. Everybody loved the cloud sofa. I'm not saying it's a bad sofa. It's very comfy. It's very comfy, a great napping sofa. It requires upkeep. Every time you get up off that sofa, you have to flip those stupid cushions. Otherwise it looks like a hot mess. And I called that in 2021. And I felt like all the other influencers, I'm not saying I was a crystal ball. I'm just saying like other people were singing the praises of the cloud sofa. I mean, I'm not saying I was the only person who was against or cautioned people against spending $15,000 to $20,000 on a sofa from our age. But my biggest concern with that one was this one, was the upkeep. Like most people don't want to sit and fluff their sofa when they get up. Most people have children maybe to deal with at some point in their lives. They might be their own, they might not be, I don't know, I don't care. But the point is that children are sometimes be involved. Every time your dog or your cat jumps on your sofa, are you literally gonna get up and sit there and fluff every time you need to get up to go get something? No, you're not. These things are incredibly annoying to upkeep. And so for most people, that's an example of something that will die. I think it's just not meant to last very long. It will be super popular for a bit and then it will die a swift death. If it requires daily maintenance to be able to make something in your home really actually work and make sense, it's honestly just not gonna last, I think, for most people. And that trend eventually will be really popular for a while until people clue in and then they die. Okay, and then next up on my list is just going to be straight up, it sucked before. And this is sort of a catch-all category for kind of history, doesn't necessarily repeat itself, but it does rhyme, which is that a lot of things in design end up coming back again. And sometimes it's, I think, really important to take a look, considering all these other points that I have listed, to also consider why didn't it last before? You know, why did these things look incredibly dated 5, 10, 15 years after they came out? Why were they so awful then? And what is it about them that now don't make sense and therefore aren't, you know, we're not excited about a resurgence, right? So a good example of something I think that hasn't come back and probably won't because it sucked before is the much made fun of by others, and maybe myself, which is the Tuscan kitchen. But before you come after me with the Tuscan kitchen, I just want to say granite countertops I think might come back, because this is the difference. Tuscan kitchens are kind of cheesy, right? They're kind of cheesy and they look like you live in an Olive Garden. And that is really a problem. This is why people don't really like them, because they always kind of had a cheesy, corny element to them that just didn't make sense. They also lack context. You're trying to pretend like you lived in Tuscany, and you don't. You live in the suburbs of Phoenix, and it doesn't make sense for you to have a Tuscan kitchen. Do you see what I'm saying? So for those two reasons, which are in my list that I just gave you, I don't believe the Tuscan kitchen is a timeless kitchen design style. But granite countertops, which are a part of the Tuscan kitchen, I think do make a lot of sense. Granite, although right now seems to be, you know, kind of seen as being a little bit of a dated stone, I think it's still a beautiful stone when done in the right way. And I think there's gorgeous examples of contemporary use of granite. I think it's a great material that people really, really enjoy. And I think that's kind of the thing, is you got to take a look back at these trends. Why didn't they work? Why did they work? And therefore, when you're looking at them, because they're kind of starting to pop back up again, why didn't they work? Why didn't they make sense before? And you may find that there were some really good reasons why they didn't make sense last time. And therefore, you can probably bet that this time, they're also going to go away just as quickly as they came back. So that's it for me today, guys. I hope you really enjoyed this video. I'm going to link here to the video that I did on items that are really difficult to clean, because I think if you're interested in low maintenance, easy to care for items that are going to last you a long time, I think you'd enjoy that list, because I make fun of some stuff that are not that. And so you know some things that you maybe would like to avoid. So take a look over there, and I will see you all in the next one. Thanks a lot. Bye.